Hello, and thank you for listening to the Keto Answers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony GUSTIN, and this week joining me is Vivica Menegaz. Vivica is a wise woman. She has a crazy story where she grew up in Italy eating super local and brought that to the States and has transformed that into one of my favorite topics about keto, which is eating a quality ketogenic diet. So she has a cookbook called the Keto Paleo Cookbook that just launched, and she has tons of great information. You guys are going to love this episode. I learned a lot of different perspectives here, and I hope you enjoy it. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. Vivica, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. GUSTIN. This is really a pleasure being here. Thank you.
There's a lot of reasons why I'm super pumped to have you on the show today, and we'll get to a few, but one of them is that your background is very, very different from traditional American, where we get raised, like my background, for example, is raised in the Midwest, kind of brainwashed through childhood, through adolescence, that, you know, these type of foods are healthy, getting convenience foods is the way you had to go about it, which made me super sick, super obese, had to go through all this different stuff to figure it out on my own. Can you just give people a little bit of background on where you come from and how you were raised and how nutrition was part of your life from an early age?
Mm-hmm, sure. Yeah, I guess for Americans, I do have a bit of an unusual background. Well, first of all, I was lucky enough to be born in Italy. I consider myself lucky because Italy is one of the places in the world that gives a lot of importance to food, and, you know, and not just food for pleasure, but also really good, wholesome food. And I was double lucky because I was born into a hospitality family. So my mom and my grandmother who raised me, they had a restaurant and a hotel, and probably my grandmother all her life, she was in hotels and restaurants. So I was raised like my first years of my life in the kitchen of a restaurant, which wasn't very safe maybe, but for me, it was amazing. I got to eat all the most amazing creations from chefs, and my mom learned how to cook from the chefs. I learned to cook from my mom and the chefs. And so even though I was never professionally trained, but I got a lot of really good solid base in cooking.
So what type of foods were you guys making? What type of dishes were you creating? So being raised in America, until I actually traveled a lot and went to Italy myself, I mean, the stereotype is that, you know, Italians just eat, you know, spaghetti and meatballs and pasta and all this stuff and bread and everything like really high in carbs and that are refined. What were the dishes that you guys were making, and how did that maybe differ from public opinion?
Oh, very, very different. You know, first of all, Italian cuisine is extremely regional. So every region in Italy has a completely different cuisine from any other place. So I was born in the north, in Sanremo, which is Liguria, which is very like seafood driven, and olive oil. There is a lot of olive oil there, tomatoes and like fresh vegetables. But I was raised in Piemonte, which is in the mountains. So it was like kind of high in a ski resort. And the Piemonte cuisine, because it's kind of landlocked in the mountains, it's only like 2-hour drive away, but the cuisine is completely different. So it's more about meats, and, you know, there was a lot of like even wild meats like boar and venison. The first thing that jumped to my mind was like pickled trout, which was like one of my favorite things as a small kid. Like we're talking 3 and 4 years old. I remember being completely fascinated by the chefs boiling the fresh trouts and then laying them down in what we call carpione, which is a mixture of vinegar and spices, and I don't know what else they put in there, but I never remade that recipe actually. So they just soak it in there for a day, and then you drain it off from the marinade, and then it's kind of like this pickled trout, and it's just amazing. And that was one of my favorite things as a 4-year-old.
Yeah, it sounds pretty incredible, actually. What type of dishes at the restaurant?
I don't remember a whole lot, but I know there was a lot of mushrooms. We lived in the mountains, and, porcinis were abundant. So all kinds of different mushrooms. So they're like, mushrooms, fried mushrooms, and then like all kinds of meats. And of course you had your like, French fries, more in the French style of like really thin complement to a steak. I remember a lot of baking of meats and dishes, like fish dishes occasionally, but river fish like trout from the mountains. And then, of course, bagna cauda is something that is a sauce that actually I remade for my blog, and it's like the ultimate keto sauce because it's 90% butter and anchovies and garlic, and it's just the most delicious thing ever. And you can dip raw vegetables in this like warm, salty, buttery sauce.
Sounds incredible.
Yes, it's really good. And, for keto is good too, because you can have your low carb veggie, whatever that you need to have, even just like endive leaves, and dip them in the warm sauce and make it keto. So it's really cool.
Right. So were people really focused on health, or was it more so an intuitive thing at this point where it's just like, oh, duh, why would we not eat things that are local?
No, it was really intuitive. And, I think that every traditional cuisine, if you go back long enough, is healthy for the people who lived in that region, because the origin of our eating, is local and it's seasonal. And of course, it's organic, because before all the bad stuff was invented, everything was organic. We had to grow with natural fertilizer, composting, manure. So when we go back to our original ways of cooking for the different places in the world, and I don't know, you're probably familiar with Dr. Weston Price and all his studies about indigenous diets and traditional diets. But Italy, when I was growing up, which was a long time ago, we're not going to mention it. No, everybody knows I'm 49. So it was like, at least 45 years ago, there was a big difference in what the panorama is right now, even in Italy. So no fast food, no packages, everything was kind of fresh, local, from scratch, most of it. I would say 90%. And so even, if we did have pasta and we did have bread, but what was the percentage of that in the diet? We had a little piece of bread with your meal, and we had pasta. Yes, Italians are pretty obsessed with pasta, but back in the days, I think the pasta was not as bad as it is now. The grain, the gluten was not as processed. Although from what I see about the conditions of Italy right now and the amount of people who are becoming celiac and gluten intolerant, the abuse of gluten and pasta is now really showing its effects. Because when I was a kid 40 years ago, not that many people were showing these symptoms, and then more and more people are showing symptoms of intolerance. That means that 40 years of pesticides, genetic manipulation, or even just inbreeding of the gluten to make it more glutinous is showing the effects in the people and making us sick.
Right. And so one of the things too is that even from the US, when I travel to either France or Italy, I can eat something here, maybe 3 bites of anything containing any wheat product, and I'll get active the next day, 2 days from then. When I go to Europe, though, it's a different story. If I have anything, like I was in Paris a couple months ago and I was eating croissants, no problem. I was in Tokyo last year and eating the ramen with the wheat noodles there, no problem. And so while you say that, that's just to put in perspective how like you said, the Italy landscape is changing a little bit, and that we're having different strains of wheat there that you guys didn't even see when you were growing up. Yet the comparison day to day right now and how much worse it is in the US is probably pretty startling to you. And then another point is that, eating things locally and that we're super, super rich in the soil. I mean, you look at even from in this country, I think I read something the other day where like spinach is now 1/20th or 1/30th has the amount of micronutrients as 45 years ago or 50 years ago or something ridiculous like that. I mean, so this is one of the things too. Maybe you have a slice of bread or something like that, but when you offload it and you have just such nutrient dense food, I think it makes it a different story than just straight away having, this nutrient poor food like we're eating now that's shipped forever. I mean, once you pick something from the ground, the nutrient density starts falling immediately. So it starts oxidizing immediately. And so this is why, why I'm a huge big fan of yours is that you always talk about, growing your own food and being local. And that's something that, obviously it was intuitive for where you were growing up, but just makes a whole lot of sense when you actually look at the science too.
Yeah. And for me, it's really a passion. I don't know if it's just my particular inclination. I am a big fan of nature and sustainability. And, if you love nature and animals and plants, you love sustainability because you want to see them thrive and you want to, and also I'm very passionate about health and holistic health. And that is all completely intertwined. So it's amazing sometimes how disconnected we are from understanding that our physical health is connected to the health of the animals we eat, the soil, the plants. We can't abuse the animals and the soil and think that we're going to be healthy. And also, we can't expect to have unsustainable practices and expect for us to continue on as a species. And that's a bigger conversation right there. But I find it's becoming daily more and more relevant as this conversation is really going on and becoming, out in the public about where are we going as a species? What are we doing? And, I feel like the ketogenic diet for me is I call it a therapeutic ketogenic diet, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And there is an iceberg down there, which is, a worldview, a cosmology. And that cosmology for me, it's all connected with the person's health and the planet's health. And the keto diet is the tip of the iceberg. And sometimes I love that it's got so popular. Sometimes I hate it because there is a lot of bad misconceptions. But at least people can come through that, entryway of a ketogenic diet thinking that it's going to be the magic bullet that solves all the problems. But they come in and then you can educate. And you can educate about all the other things that really matter for your health and for the health of our planet and, for a possible survival of our species if we're doing something about it in the end.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of really good points there, which I think we're going to get to as well. That's one of the huge reasons why I wanted to have you on is chat about quality in general. But before we get there, so I want to know, when did you come to the U.S. and what was that path like? And then did you have any roadblocks or was it always just kind of an intuitive thing for you? Thinking, oh, I want real food and it doesn't make sense to eat anything packaged. Did you have any setbacks along the way where you had a kind of paradigm shifts in your thinking about nutrition?
It was an interesting journey, because I lived in a lot of different countries. I lived in Germany first, and I lived in Spain. Then I came to the US, but then I also traveled a lot. I went back and forth to Japan. I lived back and forth to Brazil. And I love traveling to just eat local foods. But in America, there is kind of a bit of a dichotomy. So you can find the so-called local American food here, which is the standard American diet, which is really appalling, horrible. But at the same time, there is the largest number of immigrants all in one place. You can find in most societies. So when I first moved to Los Angeles, it was kind of like a mecca for me because I never had the chance to find so many different foods, ethnic foods, all in one place that I could have access to. So there was Korean food and there was Japanese food and there was Middle Eastern food and, all kinds of Indian food and Nepalese food. And so the beginning for me was not even really about nutrition. It was really about the food. And I think that, when you're in your 20s and early 30s, not a lot of people think about their health. you're just young and you get away with a lot. So you just tend to want to enjoy life, and not think about the future of your health. And it was kind of the same for me. I came here, but food has always been my passion. So I really enjoyed eating my way through Los Angeles. And I also was a food photographer for almost 15 years professionally. So I photographed for a lot of magazines. I got to eat in the best restaurants through the photographing their food, and that was amazing. But eventually, life and health catch up with you. And I was always kind of health conscious. I was raised with like homeopathic and acupuncture. And so my mom really instilled me this love of holistic health and not specifically nutrition, but just like holistic practices and alternative practices. So when I started having my first health issues, that's where I went naturally. And that kind of all, took on this path, like really put me on this path of self-care, first of all, and trying to resolve my own health problems, which started kind of early. I started having gallbladder issues at 27.
Interesting. What was your lifestyle like then, and what do you think contributed to that? And what were the interventions that you had to take to turn things around?
I think that the gallbladder itself, it was probably a lot of like genetic inheritance because both my mother and grandmother had theirs removed. But I was definitely eating everything. And, I was going out a lot and drinking. And, I was a young woman in LA having fun and, photographing. So eating a lot of different foods, rich foods. I was eating gluten, dairy, everything. Not a problem. But I think that what caused it so early was like genetic inheritance. And so I had my first gallbladder attack at 27 and I didn't even know what was happening to me. And so
So did you just have that kind of like sharp right upper quadrant pain?
I thought I'd broken a rib. I was like, what? How did I break a rib? I didn't do anything. It was the most intense pain through my back, like a sword, through your right side of your body. And I didn't do anything. I have kind of a slight phobia of doctors, so I tried not to go to doctors. But I eventually went to see my chiropractor, recommended from a friend. I went to see this chiropractor who then became my primary doctor for almost 20 years now. He's in Beverly Hills, amazing guy. And he works with the same supplements that I now work with Standard Process and MediHerb. And he was the first one who introduced me to the concept of nutrition and nutritional supplements. So I was a patient before ever becoming a practitioner for at least 15 years.
Interesting. And so did everything turn around pretty quickly after you guys kind of diagnosed that it was a gallbladder issue? And then like how has health been since that point? Did you have any other hurdles to jump over?
Oh, yeah. We actually, he's an amazing practitioner, but I feel like every practitioner has some little blind spots. And I think his blind spot was that he never takes people through a thorough detox. And that's evidently that's what I was needing. And I just kind of managed. I never got my gallbladder removed. I managed. I went up and down with it. I learned how to manage my diet. I started being more careful with my diet, learning about food from a medicinal point of view and like healing point of view. So I started really taking responsibility for myself, and he helped with the supplements and everything. But we weren't making like huge headway. Everything was just coming along. I was maintaining. I was never really sick, nothing major at that point. And then in my early 40s, I started to study nutrition, and I met another chiropractor, Dr. Deborah Penner in Chico, who was my first real mentor. And she literally pushed me into studying nutrition, because when she met me, she really liked me and wanted me to work for her. And she just really kind of forced me to study nutrition so I could work for her, which I ended up doing for 5 years. And so I studied for my certification in nutrition and took a lot of different courses together with her, worked for her practice. Really, I was so lucky to start off just working in a clinical practice with a lot of different patients and real people. So applying the knowledge right away. But she also did the best thing ever for me. She put me through my first detox, and not just one, but we did like 4 detoxes and a gallbladder flush in a year.
Okay. So I want to pause here and just,
Yes.
I want your take on what that means and what you guys did, because it's such a trendy thing right now where people think, oh, I go on a 7-day juice detox, or I go on a bone broth detox. What does the term detox mean to you? And then can you kind of walk us through what exactly that process meant to you and like how it actually worked?
Yeah. And thank you for that question, because like I see so many people doing the wrong things with detoxing that it's really upsetting sometimes. But it's like everything. You can do it in a better way. You can do it the wrong way. So one premise is that in order to do detox right, so detoxing per se is a great concept. And yes, we do very much need it. I always tell my patients, imagine you never cleaned your house, or you just kind of like swept the middle of the floor, but never like moved the furniture, never dusted, never swept the cobwebs. How would you live? And, detoxing is kind of an ongoing process because we live in a world full of toxins. So we do desperately need detoxing as the world gets more and more toxic. But one thing that a lot of people miss, there are actually 2 things that are basic to detoxing that a lot of people miss. The first one is that we need protein to detox. So juice cleanses, great. How are you going to finish phase 2 detox of your liver if you're missing the amino acids and the proteins that are needed to bind, forgive my English, to bind those activated toxins that are coming out of phase 1. So if you don't have a lot of available protein, what happens is that either your body takes it out of your muscles, which is not ideal, or you need to provide it dietary protein, so good, clean proteins in order to complete that detox phase. But the other part that is really, really important, and it comes even before, is that if your detox pathways are not open and functioning, by detoxing, just indiscriminately jumping into a detox, you're going to cause a lot of trouble for yourself, because it's just like, imagine you're trying to do a big spring cleaning in your house and the doors and windows are blocked. And you just start sweeping, cleaning, and, taking trash, but the trash is nowhere to go. It just keeps bouncing around. Dust and, and things start just bouncing around, getting in the air, getting everywhere. So you kind of like do more harm than good if you're trying to detox and you have never done what's called opening drainage pathways, right, which is one of the first things we learn in nutrition.
So this is excellent. I'm very glad that your definition of detox actually includes detoxification pathways of the liver. This is one of the things that when people say detox, they don't realize that your liver actually has different pathways it needs to take toxins through. And that's, one of the many jobs of the liver. But yeah, this is imperative, and you need the tools to do the job. So like you said, if you had a bunch of mess all over the floor, but you didn't have a broom or you didn't have a vacuum or anything like that, good luck. Like you said, you're just going to create more of a mess, kicking things around. So good point. I want you to continue. So just mention the process you just talked about, and then if there's more overview on that, I would love for people to hear about it.
For me, it's like, really like about education, and kind of there is a bit of pragmatism in nutrition of like, and I know all about it, we go through several steps that are really important. And like, so you have to set somebody up in order for detoxing. But what really happens is that your body has its own intelligence. And people sometimes do not understand that true healing happens when we provide the correct environment for the body to do its work. Our bodies have all the tools that they need to heal and to preserve homeostasis if we give the right conditions. That means sometimes that, supporting those drainage pathways, supporting the liver and the kidneys so that they can excrete the toxins. And then once that happens, your body is like, ooh, I can let go of all these heavy metals, or I can let go of these pesticides that have been storing in your fat for 50 years and not being able to let go. And that's why sometimes, a lot of times, people cannot lose weight. They're obsessing over macros. I was like, if I just had a little less protein, or if I just had a little bit more fat. No, that's not it. This is not why you can lose weight.
100%. Yeah.
It's because your liver is congested and your liver is completely stuck. And that's why your body is just storing toxins away in your adipose tissues and, hoping that you can maintain toxicity low enough to survive.
Right. And this is a big point, because we have tons of people who always reach out to us, and me specifically, asking, I've gone through this, this, and this, and all I want to do is lose weight. And it's been 3 weeks and my macros are at this amount and nothing's happening. I'm so frustrated. And I'm sure we'll get to this soon, but my first question is always, are you eating only real food? So to back it up a little bit further, do you do anything specifically to determine, this is a person who would be a good candidate for something like along the lines of a detox?
Well, honestly, Anthony, at this point, everyone.
Okay. So let's just start by saying, okay, everyone needs it. And you said you need some liver support and some kidney support. What are the things that you're recommending? Is this like the first step? Is that people ratchet up through this, or what is your kind of go-to progress here?
Well, first step is, I think you made a good point about eating quality things. And I think that an easy first step for everybody, even working alone or working with a practitioner, but the first thing you can do for yourself is try to eliminate everything that adds toxicity to your body and brings, sometimes I tell my patients, your food and your substances that you use can bring you two things, life or death. You choose. It's that simple. If it doesn't bring you life, it brings you death. That means it ages you, it makes you toxic, it makes you, fat, and all of it.
I'm stealing that, by the way. I'll credit you occasionally, but I'm taking it.
Okay, as long as occasionally, that's good enough. But that's it. What are you putting in your mouth? What are you putting in your skin, on your skin? What are you putting in your house? Is it life or death? So when you're reaching for something, even if it's immediate gratification and stress eating and emotional eating, that's a whole other topic. But even then, at least choose something that will bring you life. So if you have to stress eat, don't eat a donut. Eat, a fat bomb. Is it ideal? Or, maybe not. Maybe you're still eating too many calories. Maybe you're eating too much fat. But it's thing that is actually feeding your body. Eat a piece of organic grass-fed meat. Eat an egg, and if you need to eat 10 eggs, fine, eat 10 eggs, but don't eat 10 donuts. So it's about making a little bit of better choices. And, another thing that you can steal if you want is I always tell my patients, pick your battles. Pick your battles, because there is, of course, levels. We are not all born fully organic, sustainable nutritionists. We're just where we are at. But you can start with one better choice. And I tell my patients, when you're starting from a really dark place of sad American diet, maybe eliminate gluten. And that's the first step you do. Then the second step is try to eliminate sugar. And if you can't do that, maybe you can eliminate dairy. One step at a time. I get all kinds of different people that I work with. Some people are quite advanced. Some people are really at frozen pizza level. The famous, one patient recently, I'm like, what do you feed your kids? And she's like, I've been feeding them frozen pizza because I'm too busy and desperate and I don't know what else to do. And she has kind of become the symbol of the kind of people that I do want to help, because I'm like, there's got to be a better way. There is a better way.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. A lot of people, especially when I was working a lot with one-on-one, I fell into 3 camps. The first one was they were ready to make all changes at once, usually due to some huge life event, like their parent got diagnosed with cancer, or they had a diagnosis of diabetes, something that kind of shook them, or someone who's just super intense. So people in San Francisco were super type A and like to take a lot of things, just, give me everything you have and let's move forward. Then there's another subset who, like you said, need to take incremental steps. It's really hard. Like I didn't go through it and just go from eating a standard American diet to where I am now. It's been very incremental. And then the third part is people who know that's a problem, that they just don't care and they don't want to change. And so that's kind of the camps that I think about, and then extrapolate the behavior change to that. But before we move forward with any of this stuff, I know I'm going to get tons of questions about it, so I want to revisit and hammer again on this detox pathway thing. So you said liver support, kidney support. Are there any certain things besides just general food, maybe specific food recommendations or specific supplements that you're using with patients of yours that cover some of these broad spectrum bodily functions?
So, well, the first thing for me is that I use supplements that are not really over the counter. They should be used with a practitioner. So unfortunately, I cannot give you recommendations for standard process supplements, which are my main detox openers, drainage openers. The other thing is that I do applied kinesiology. I do long distance muscle testing. And so for me, there is no one supplement like for one person or one category. It's really down to the individual. And so what I would recommend, instead of having, I'm not able to give you supplement recommendations, but you can do a lot of good with foods. So, liver loves bitter. And this is one of the tastes of the 5 tastes that, we have completely eliminated from the American diet. So people really don't like the taste bitter. They're not used to it. They have lost that ability to appreciate the bitters. So bringing back bitter into your life as the best thing you can do for the liver. So bitter herbs, like starting with dandelion greens, I think is one of my favorite things. And then, things like all bitter greens are great. Escarole, endive, arugula, what else? Radicchio, it's the Italian one. So any bitter greens, they're really beneficial, especially within the context of a ketogenic diet, because, of course, they bring phytonutrients, they bring, liver pushing substances. They also bring fiber, they're greens, so they're really good for keto. But eliminating toxins then and trying to eat as clean as possible, I think, is the second thing you can do. And then I would say, if you know that you are at the stage where you really need help, maybe working with a professional would be advised. So they can use the right supplements and, the right drainage openers. Because if I told you, use this one thing, and then maybe for 30% of the audience, that would be the right supplement. But what about the other 70%? So they would use it and not get the right results and be like, oh, she was totally wrong.
Right. And this is a very, very glad that you said that. I mean, one of my biggest things that I always pound the table on is that everyone is an individual and you always need to test things yourself, because there's no one general recommendation. Every time someone asks me a question, whether it be on Instagram or social media or anything like that, or email, my answer is generally, well, it depends. I don't have a full history in you. I don't have everything that's going on. There's so many more questions that we need to really do to cater things to the individual. So very good points. And just to bring it back also to us talking earlier about the whole wheat modification thing. I mean, we have gone now generations over generations trying to make things less bitter and more sweet, essentially, and more palatable. And so, I mean, and this is probably where you have a lot of experience with, but I mean, getting some of these strains of these plants and growing them yourself might be a better way to get a more, I guess, normal plant representation than what we're used to, getting at a supermarket now.
That's right. And also, I always recommend, not everybody can grow their own food, even though you can have a herb box. Any herbs are all kitchen herbs really good for you, and they're so rich in phytonutrients. So like, parsley and cilantro and rosemary and tarragon and thyme, like those are easy little things. Even, great projects for kids that to have their own little herb box on the balcony.
And that's a good point that anybody can really do that. And one of the things that I'm not sure most people really realize is that if you're looking at micronutrients on the spectrum and you went from top to bottom, you have things like organ meats, the highest level, right? And then you have fatty animal products below that, lean animal products, obviously if they're raised properly. And then under that, you have spices and herbs. And then under that, you have general vegetables like kale that people think are the magic food that is better than anything else. And so just when prioritizing, I mean, you're getting so much bang for your buck out of herbs. And like you said, anybody can do it. Even if you have a small, tiny apartment, you can have a windowsill. If you have natural light at all, you should be able to grow these things.
Right. And and get a lot of nutrition out of it. I am always, my mentality is like spearheaded by nutritional value and like more bang for your buck kind of ideas. That's why my blog is full of organ meats and, fresh ingredients and fresh spices and herbs. And that's why my blog is not that popular with the keto world.
Right. No, and that's why I love it. Yeah.
Chicken livers in 20 million different ways.
Yeah. So I have grass-fed beef liver from this amazing ranch here in Texas where I just moved. And that's going to be, I'm going to cook that up in a couple hours here. And that's my meal for tonight. And I think I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, you said something on your website that I read that you think organ meat is the foundation to health. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Again, because, then let's make a small premise here. You just said it, but it's like grass-fed, pastured, ideally like, pastured, grass-fed, grass-finished, whenever possible. I would not eat the organs of a factory farmed animal. I don't eat factory farmed animals anymore. It's just against my ethics before anything. And I'm a pretty big carnivore, you guys, like listeners. They know I love my meat, but I just would rather not eat meat than eat a factory farmed animal. I stopped eating pork for that reason. I will still eat wild boar if I can find it, or if I know who raised the pig and how, and the conditions, then I might eat some of the pig, but otherwise, no. And that's because I find it absolutely unethical. And, I don't agree on the suffering, unnecessary suffering of animals. But our organ meats of healthy pastured animals are just like nutrient powerhouses. And you don't need a whole lot of it. You can also, of course, always have your steak, and your ribs and your yummy parts that you like, but to introduce, 15-20% organ meats into your diet, it really eliminates the need for a lot of supplementation. Sometimes, I give like supplements to my patients. I don't want to give them 20 things. They come from the naturopath with bags of supplements, like shopping bags. And I hate that because it's just not sustainable for you to take all those pills all the time.
Well, not only that, there's so much to the foods in the absorption that we know of, and probably a lot that we don't know of. And so, for instance, the fat-soluble vitamins and how basically A, D, and K all work synergistically. I mean, this is one of the things that if you take just vitamin D in isolation, well, then you're not really telling what the vitamin D to do. And so then if you have that with calcium, then you can have hardening of arteries. But the vitamin K in only certain forms helps you kind of direct that calcium towards certain places. There's all this nuance to nutrition that when we dial it down, just one specific nutrient and then try to stack them all back together, like to your point, I mean, the food already has what we need and has all the cofactors that we need for absorption and for the actual use in our bodies. And so thank you for championing that. You said you have tons of organ meat recipes. One of the things that I always get pushback on is, well, how the hell do I stomach this stuff? Because it's so disgusting. Any tips there? You're the chef here.
You can start like hiding it in recipes. And I do have a couple of recipes. I think my very, very first recipe for my blog was a kind of meatloaf. It's pâté de campagne. It's a French recipe of like that coarse pâté that is wrapped in bacon and has liver in it, but you don't really taste the liver because it's really kind of bacony and meaty and, a hearty kind of meatloaf. So you kind of hide it. That's the beginning for me. And you make it really tasty. So I remember when I lived in Chico in Northern California, and I taught classes for the Western Press Foundation. So, that was kind of funny because I used to get liver for free. And I used to get heart for free from the farmers because nobody bought it. And then I taught 3 cooking classes for liver and heart. And suddenly there was no heart or liver to be had because everybody loved the recipe so much. They started cooking it themselves and then everybody wanted to buy it. So
rookie mistake.
Yes, I learned from that. Never do that again.
Yeah. One of my friends, Mary Shanuda, she's a paleo chef. She has a recipe that I've stole and kind of repurposed it several times as my own, which is basically like I used to make chili with, bacon and beef and bison and like all these different animals, but then chopping up and throwing in organ meats into like a chili where it's super spicy and has all of these herbs and already super heavy taste is a super easy way to start getting that. And then I fed it to people who don't like organ meat, and I was like, oh yeah, what's in here is X, Y, and Z, and they usually, oh gross, can't believe you made me eat that. But slowly but surely, transition these people.
Yeah, and I think that it's the mind is the biggest blockage because part of it is like, yes, there is that getting used to the taste of things, and when you grow up with certain flavors, it's a lot easier to accept them because you just, when I was a kid, my mom made me liver. My mom made me fried brains at least once a week, and I loved them. I thought it was the most normal thing in the world. If now I tell people like I'm eating fried cow brains or sheep brains, they're just like falling over dead. But, for me, that was normal. There was no doubt about it. And when I was a kid, when something went on my plate, there was no question about eating it or not. My mom was a single mom, working mom, like what's on your plate is what you eat, period. So I didn't have options. When it was liver, it was liver. When it was cow brains, it was cow brains. When it was pasta, it was pasta. We're kind of like equal across the board. So there was no discrimination. I think that the mentality, what we teach our kids here in America, that certain foods are kids' foods, certain foods are adults' foods, that didn't exist in my growing up, and I think that gets programmed into the kids' brains. So the kids think like, I'm not supposed to like liver because it's gross. Everybody says so. But, look at indigenous children or, other cultures like the Inuits, they eat raw liver straight from their catch, like if they catch a seal or a sea lion, they'll cut it up right there and then and eat the liver still pulsing. And it's a delicacy. It's amazingly yummy for them because it's pure raw nutrients.
It's incredible. And I think that one of the things that you kind of indirectly mentioned here was that you guys just ate what you had. And I think that the availability and convenience of food now, I mean, the hyperpalatability we have with food is pretty ridiculous, where, we can go from dish to dish to dish in the same meal. And because things taste so good and are basically engineered to make us want to eat more and more and more, we just eat so much more than we need. I'm doing currently, as the time of this recording, we'll see how long it lasts, but carnivore diet. So I'm only eating animal products, a lot from this local farm that I was talking about. They also catch wild boar. Same type of situation. I'm not eating anything that I don't know where it came from. And having one giant fat steak or ribeye, like you can only eat so much of one thing. And that's the thing too, is like regulating appetite is one of these things where like there's a fine line between making something taste good enough to be able to eat it versus having it taste so artificially good that you just overeat. And so I think that this is a good place to mention another reason why I wanted you on the show was to chat about your book. Because this thing is, as a keto cookbook, one of the biggest gripes I have about ketosis in general, and you probably share this overwhelmingly so, is that people just generally don't care about quality with ketosis. I get like tagged on Instagram a bunch saying like hashtag keto meal or whatever, and it's like, cheese steak that's fried with like this disgusting ground beef, and then has a layer of artificial cheese on top of that with bacon on it, and like, oh yeah, it's keto. Look at my millimolars on my ketone meter. And I think people are really missing the point there. But I think you highlighted a really good point, which is, and we can mention and chat about this more, but the keto paleo concept and thinking about quality of food in conjunction with the amount and quantity of food. I always like to say, like, start with quality first, and then we'll switch you to quantity based. So like start looking at whole foods and then go to a ketogenic diet after that, or do the same at once if you want to. But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about your book and why you wanted to write it and kind of what's included in that and then your philosophy behind it?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And I just want to make it just a really small premise here, a side rabbit hole real quick. But, one thing that I hear a lot of people say is like, I can't afford to eat like that. Or like grass-fed beef is elitist. But then, really, like, I'm like, really? You have an iPhone 10 and a brand new car, you're wearing a Gucci purse, but you can't afford to eat grass-fed beef. And not everybody is like that, but a lot of people, if you really thought about it, how much of your budget is going to your food?
Right.
And then maybe you give 20% of your budget to your food, but then at the end of the year, you spend like thousands of dollars to your doctor,
right,
or your health insurance.
Or just like, I went and found this ranch, and I think it averaged out to a little over $5 a pound, and this is for every single cut. And wow. Yeah, and so like when you buy in bulk and when you approach the ranch or the farm directly, and so if people don't have any source for this, go to eatwild.com, and they have usually a list of ranches and farms in the area, and you can go check out what they're all about. But this is one of the things, like when you buy in bulk and you buy direct, you actually cut out a lot of the middleman type of markup, and you can get a lot of these things way cheaper than what you normally associate them with.
Yeah, and like the best investment ever is spend a few $100s in a freezer, one of those big chest freezers, and then like I say, like just like you say, buy from the farmer. Go straight to your farmer. And like I was going to say, the next thing after growing it yourself, go to the farmer's market. And, you will get everything you need there, seasonal and local and organic. And I'm sure that 90% of places have farmer's market. I know there are places where in winter you don't have a farmer's market. Not everywhere is California. But then again, you eat seasonal. So maybe in winter you will eat more animal products and less greens or fruit. You don't really need to eat fruits, but you'll have your, squashes maybe, which you don't need to eat a lot. Anyways, I know we're digressing here. So.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same point though, just the definition and your stance behind keto paleo.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I talked about this in the preface of my book. See, when I was working on my book, Leanne Vogel's book, Keto Diet, came out, and I got the book, we're friends, and she sent me the book to you, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the Bible of ketogenic. She is amazing. And I got super intimidated. But also this book kind of sat on my shelf or on my desk for a long period of time. And I was intimidated and I couldn't even open it really. Or I flicked through it and I was like, I'm too busy. I can't look at it. And so these ideas start seeping in my hand as like, I'm too busy for this. This is too big and too complicated. And how many of my patients are too busy for that? And so, I started thinking about my lifestyle and the lifestyle of a lot of my patients and readers. And I'm like, a lot of people really don't have that much time and energy to focus on, this little meal plan or that meal plan or that way of eating and how to make a carb up and how to calculate this. And I was like, it's so overwhelming. So I wanted to create something that was like completely aligned with my philosophy of like nutrient dense, delicious, nutritious, fun, but as well as easy. And so you will spend your time creating amazing foods that are not that complicated. Maybe I have like 5 recipes in there that are kind of more difficult, more advanced, but something really easy and gratifying that you just eat the food and you don't think so hard about the macros. You don't think so hard about, the meal plan or this formula or that formula. Just eat the food. So I had, my intro is pretty short and to the point. I talk about my philosophy a little bit. I talk about keto paleo and what it means for me. And I'm just like, just eat the food, try the food and try the difference. And once you've, if you work your way through the 80 recipes of the book, you should have a pretty good idea what this way of eating entails. It's not rocket science. And in the meantime, instead of spending, 10 hours trying to figure out what meal plan, what macros, what, percentage of this and that, and do it all on the calculator, instead, spend 10 hours in the kitchen, go to the farmer's market, get yourself some great ingredients, and then make some recipes and eat them. And it's kind of just like, when you go to the doctor and they spend all that money to get you like a fancy diagnosis, and then you're like $2,000 in the hole, but you know that you have this fancy name of a disease and you have done absolutely zero to resolve it. For me, it's kind of the same thing. I prefer to take steps to resolve your issue instead of spending a bunch of money in diagnostics. And the same way, I prefer you take steps in making the food that's going to heal you instead of spending hours figuring out what ways, the macros exactly, by the dot, by the 1%, and tracking everything in MyFitnessPal and, finding this thing and that thing. So I'm very practical and very result oriented. And that is what I wanted in my book. Just simple, good food.
It's incredible that the point of view you take is that essentially, there's always a time and place for nuance and details, but getting started to eat real whole food, generally you need to know how to cook, and you know how to cook things that are delicious, and it's not that complicated. If you were to just say maybe 2 or 3 skills or dishes that people could cook that have a lot of versatility that could help them do other things. I mean, a lot of times people ask me for recipes when I post up on Instagram. I'm like, I just honestly threw whatever I had in the fridge together, and I know how food science works. So I combine, acid and fat and some of those other things, and everything tastes amazing. Any top skills that you think people can master to have a better way around the kitchen?
I think that intuition is the best skill.
Yeah, taste a lot of stuff, right? And this is one of the things. What? It's like people who are crazy wine snobs, get to that point because they tasted a lot of different wines, and so they can see oh, this is good or this is not good because of this reason or that reason. And if you don't try a lot of different stuff and experiment and get your hands dirty, you're never going to have that intuition, in my opinion.
That's right. Absolutely. And I also think intuition and creativity, because people are they feel so intimidated by cooking. And, a lot of people come and are their mothers have not cooked. They never spend time in the kitchen. And they also really see cooking as a chore. But I feel when you switch that mind frame, you really reframe this activity. And instead of looking at cooking as a chore, just like your mom really installed in you or imbued in your head, when you were a kid and your mom wanted to watch TV and get her nails done, her hair done, or, whatever, go shopping, instead of being in the kitchen, because that was considered a burden and was considered something that the lady doesn't need to do, or all these social conditioning and deep programming that we received, especially in this country in 40s, 50s, 60s, after the war, especially as people, there was an agenda behind that, and is that they wanted to sell you processed foods. So suddenly being in a kitchen became a negative connotation for a woman. You should have been there sitting totally pretty and made up holding a martini. That was good.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I haven't thought that much about what led to cooking habits, but you make a lot of really good points. And I don't look at it like a chore either. I think about it kind of like you said, creativity. And I get in the zone when I'm in the kitchen. And for me, it's almost a meditative process where I know and I look forward to the end of the day where I'm like, okay, keep grinding at work, keep grinding. And then I can just be completely fluid and in a flow state when I'm in the kitchen and I cook and I just make all these creative things. And that's how I look at it, not necessarily like, oh, I have to do this. That's for me throughout the day. I try to minimize cooking as much as possible to have food be fuel. And so that will look like super easy stuff, maybe leftovers, salads, things like that. And then in the evening is when I really go after it and lose myself in the kitchen. And I found that works really well for me with my schedule.
Yeah, I think our schedules are very similar and our lifestyles seem to be very similar as well, because it's kind of the same. And actually, I'm working on my new program right now and my new kind of concept that is really based on that first part of the day where like you need to feed yourself, nourish yourself the right way on a super tight schedule and sometimes on a budget too. But like, what do you do when you only have 10 minutes to eat? So it's 50% about preparedness and 50% about improvisation, kind of like, variations on a theme. And I think that is also a good skill to have. But, back to the reframing, I really like to invite your listeners to think about cooking as a creative expression. And it's something that you can't go wrong. Really, I mean, yes, you can burn something. It becomes pretty inedible, and I do that sometimes when I get sidetracked. But it's really something that you can express yourself, and it's part of the general picture of healing. Is like it's a grounding activity. It connects you back to your food. It connects you back to the earth. And for those of you who live in the city and don't have access to a lot of nature, cooking lets you access nature. And so it is very beneficial. And, I think it also really lowers your cortisol at the end of the day. So it could be something relaxing and not thinking like, okay, you come home from work and now it's just like, panic. I need to throw something together. But that's your moment where you kind of live the world outside your doorstep. And it's your kingdom or queendom. It's the kitchen. And you get to create. You get to have fun. You get to make a mess, and be proud of it. Right. Like release those attachments and just create something that you're going to get rewarded immediately because then you get to eat it.
Yeah, love it. So usually it comes back to mindset. Well, we're both crazy busy, so I don't want to keep you too long. So the book, I'm sure you can find on Amazon, correct?
Yes.
That's where we had a copy at our office in San Francisco, but when I moved here, that's where I went to Amazon to pick another one for my house. So thank you for that. And then let people know where else they can find you, where they can tune in.
So my website is my blog, thenourishedcaveman.com. And I'm also on Facebook because, yes, I'm older, so I still do Facebook. But I'm also on Instagram and on Pinterest. So if you just look for The Nourished Caveman or Vivica Menegaz, I will pop up everywhere. In Italy, it's like, you're like parsley. You're everywhere.
Love it. All right, Vivica, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.